In the Naruto story, there's been countless Kekkei Genkais that have been underused, underwhelming, or were simply laid to rest in the background. One of those being Crystal Release. Today's video is going to be asking the question of what would happen if this ability was in the right hands of, well, the main character to get as much screen time as it possibly can and also get a little bit of that plot armor boost. So today's video, we're basically going to be throwing the ability at Naruto and seeing if anything at all would change in the Naruto story. And if you guys are excited for that, make sure to hit the like button. And also, if you guys go on to enjoy today's video and want to see the rest of the story, you can do so by becoming a member and joining the first tier of becoming a member. By doing that, you guys will get access to members only videos and you will be able to see the rest of this entire series on the channel before anybody else can. That said, let's get started.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Naruto, the Nine-Tailed Jinchuriki, arguably the most hated character in the Hidden Leaf Village as of this current moment, would essentially be walking down, just seeing if he can, maybe potentially go into another owner's shop. Naruto would be doing so, and it's at this moment that Naruto would stumble across Ichiraku Ramen. When he ends up making his way there, Naruto goes inside and, goes on to be like, hey, how are you guys doing? He goes on to be his kind usual self. And suddenly when Naruto is eating said ramen, Naruto would get so excited by how good it tastes that Naruto awakens a Kekkei Genkai inside of him. Crystal Release. And in this story, Naruto is not going to be the second user of this, seeing as the first person to have ever used this ability was a filler character, so non-canon. So Naruto in this story is actually going to be the first user of Crystal Release ever in the Naruto universe. Much like Hashirama was the first wood style user, Naruto will be the first Crystal Release jutsu user. And when Naruto creates these crystals, Ichiraku and his daughter would see this and they would be shocked, asking Naruto how he did that. Naruto goes on to say that he has no idea, and from here Ichiraku looks to him and asks him if he can maybe replicate it. Naruto goes on to essentially try, but all he could have mustered at that one time was that one singular medium-sized crystal. Naruto looks towards Ichiraku as Ichiraku looks at Naruto and asks him if he can keep this crystal in exchange for the food. Naruto tells him of course, and he says if he can keep them coming, and Ichiraku smiles and then goes on to give Naruto like 2 more plates before the dude gets full and runs off home, as Ichiraku got his payment via crystals. Now I'm not sure if these crystals realistically would have a lot of value in the Naruto story, just due to the simple fact that, well, they are just crystals, and I'm not really sure if that's something that like everybody would exactly be willing to pay top dollar for. So I'm going to be saying that that's probably going to be the only times that I have Naruto actually use the crystal to actually be a means of payment. So this is kind of just going to be the one exception, right? That said though, Naruto, after performing this act, would go over to his house and begin trying to replicate it. He would spend weeks trying to do this, and eventually after he realizes he can't anymore, he would become so frustrated he slams his hand on his table. After doing so, Naruto would realize that he would have actually turned his entire table to crystal. And when Naruto sees this, he immediately decides that he's going to be running towards the direction of the Hokage. When he does so, he informs Hiruzen of his strange ability, and Hiruzen goes on to ask him if this is really true. Naruto tells him that he promises he's not lying, and tells him that even though he can't do it now, he did it at his house, and tells him that he has proof. He takes Hiruzen back to his apartment, and it's at this moment that Hiruzen would see the crystallized, how do I put this? The crystallized desk, right? Naruto, upon showing this to Hiruzen would be dumbfounded and tell Naruto that he has a Kekkei Genkai, telling Naruto to work on this ability and giving him about 4 scrolls to actually begin studying and trying to see if there's any way that he can actually activate his Kekkei Genkai. After Hiruzen learns of Naruto having a strange Kekkei Genkai, he would think to himself that it might potentially be linked to Kurama, but after giving it some thought and thinking back to how Kushina was, he realizes that that's definitely definitely not how this works. Naruto must have inherited it after being one of the first Namikaze and Uzumaki born, children. So after Naruto has this small little situation go down, Naruto ends up pretty much for the next following years working on his crystal release ability and trying to master it as best as he possibly can. This would eventually lead Naruto to a bunch of days where he essentially tries to convert things to crystal. He tries to make crystallized weapons, tries to make crystallized shuriken, tries to essentially transform other things into crystals, and even create crystal-like clones. Naruto, upon having this incredible ability, would try to do everything that he possibly can, but everything would be kind of derpy. His crystal clones would look very, very down, if you know what I'm saying, and his shurikens would be very not sharp, you know what I mean? So Naruto isn't exactly going down the best path currently, but after a few more years of training, I'm confident Naruto will be able to do something with his crystal release abilities. Naruto at this point would finally find himself in the academy, being told by Mizuki that there's actually a secret portion of the exam that could help him pass. Mizuki, after telling this to Naruto, would have a smirk on his face, and Naruto would go on to essentially go after the scroll of, the Forbidden Scroll. Once Naruto gets his hands on this, he goes on to learn the multi-shadow clone jutsu just like he would in the original, and use it to pretty much destroy Mizuki, beating the man to a pulp and throwing him into the, Hidden Leaf Village jail, I guess you could say. Following this situation, Naruto gets actually accepted into Team 7 just like he would in the original, and would end up meeting his teammates Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi Hatake the very next day. After, of course, Kakashi would be very, very late, right? Kakashi was taking his sweet time, and Naruto was just like, why are you taking so long, bro? Like, why? Like, it says 7, come pick your team up at 7, not 12. Kakashi, he says he got lost on the path of life, and the team goes up to tell him, their goals and ambitions. After all is said and done, Kakashi would poof into smoke, and this is when Naruto would have a vein appear on his forehead, thinking that Kakashi didn't even have the guts to show up there himself. Instead, he sent a shadow clone, something that he could have probably done way, way ahead of time. And Naruto, after being angered by this, would decide to just let it go, going home and going on to essentially continue practicing a jutsu that Naruto has been trying to work on. It's heavily inspired by the water dragon jutsu, something that Naruto read up on, seeing as this Naruto is a bit different than the one in the original. See, this Naruto isn't going to be going around flamboyantly rocking a orange jumpsuit. Instead, goes around in a all black, jaded looking dope outfit. Not only that, but Naruto's hairstyle is actually going to be a lot different than what he had in the original. Instead of having it spiked up, Naruto kind of has it falling down, similar to what his hair kind of looks like whenever it's wet. And his headband, instead of having it around his head, he would actually have it pretty much falling on his neck, kind of like Hinata has it. It's a pretty cool way of wearing it, I personally think, and just having it on your forehead, it just looks weird. That's just my personal opinion, but again, I'm just some random YouTube kid. Anyways though, what basically ends up happening following this is essentially they end up meeting Kakashi Sensei the very next day at the training grounds. When they end up meeting Kakashi Sensei, what ends up pretty much happening is nothing much, honestly. I mean, they go on to essentially be told about the bell test. Kakashi goes on to pretty much tell them that, okay, they can get started now. He whips out a book like an absolute savage and then looks towards their direction before saying, all right, 3, 2, and Naruto waits until he finally says 1, before suddenly Naruto slams his hands onto the ground and says, Crystal Dragon Jutsu! And this dragon comes out looking derpy. The second that Kakashi heard Dragon Jutsu, he immediately got on guard. But when he turned to see what Naruto had just created, Kakashi could not help but start dying laughing. Because what he saw before him was essentially it looked like a dragon with Down syndrome, pretty much. Like, the dragon was crooked, the face looked goofy, the dragon itself was stubby and short, and Naruto was pretty much extremely embarrassed as Kakashi was laughing, and Naruto would just look to Kakashi before saying, "Stop laughing!" He suddenly then went on to create a sort of crystallized scythe And after he does this, he runs towards the direction of Kakashi. And Kakashi would lift an eyebrow at this, thinking that Naruto did not just use any hand seals. And Naruto would rush in towards the direction of Kakashi before swinging the scythe at his direction. Kakashi would dodge very quickly, take out a kunai, and begin to essentially dodge all of these attacks that Naruto was throwing at him. Eventually though, Naruto would hold a hand sign out in front of himself and say multi-shadow clone jutsu, as a bunch of shadow clones would come out with their very own scythes. And as soon as Kakashi sees this, he realizes, yep, you got to take this a bit seriously. So Kakashi would jump into the air and wield do 7 hand seals before finally saying water style water flood jutsu. I don't know if that's even a real thing, but you get what it is. It's water flood. It would go on to go down and pretty much destroy all the multi-shadow clone jutsu clones that Naruto would have created, leading Kakashi to finally have a second of, well, relaxation and be able to breathe calmly, knowing that he was able to take down Naruto relatively easily. Naruto, after seeing this, would decide to take out one more of his cards before thinking that if this doesn't work, then nothing will. He rushes in towards Kakashi and begins trying to crystallize Kakashi himself, but Kakashi's much too fast and the process of crystallizing somebody isn't something instantaneously. So instead, once Naruto closes the gap small enough, he pretty much ends up weaving 2 hand signs before suddenly a ton of spinning like shuriken things would come flying at him, and they would look more like saucers instead of shuriken, mind you. They end up rushing towards the direction of Kakashi, and once Kakashi sees these things, he widens his eyes as he substitutes out of there, and Sasuke would be right there waiting for Kakashi to eventually show up near him. Once Sasuke sees his opportunity to actually strike at Kakashi, he would do so and immediately jump down the tree as he says, "Fire style, fireball jutsu," as he shoots a gigantic fireball at Kakashi, who's like, "What? Genin?" But then suddenly Naruto appears right behind him and tries to essentially snag one of the bells. He grabs one and then rolls out of the way, and Kakashi would then look towards his direction before telling him that he did a pretty good job. He would then look towards Sasuke and get serious before knocking Sasuke and then tracking Sakura down using Kenjutsu on her and taking her out very, very swiftly. Following this, what Kakashi goes on to do isn't exactly much of a shocker to me or anybody else really, because what Kakashi goes on to essentially do is pretty much tie Sasuke and Sakura to the post. After Naruto gets his filling of the food, Naruto grabs another one of the plates and looks at Sasuke and Sakura as he tells them that they seem pretty hungry. Sasuke goes on to be proud and say he's not hungry at all, and Naruto looks to him before saying, "Oh really, you're not hungry?" Sasuke looks to him, then looks away, and his stomach begins growling as Sasuke damns himself, and suddenly he would see Naruto before him just feeding him. And Sasuke kind of feels a bit happy by this, but also a bit ashamed because Naruto's the one feeding him. Suddenly, after Naruto gives Sasuke half, he would then turn towards Sakura and tell her that the team has to be at full strength, as he feeds her, and suddenly Kakashi ends up arriving, going on to scare Naruto, causing him to drop the food and then be told that they passed, as he then goes on to explain that those who go on to abandon the mission and break the rules are scum, but those who abandon their teammates, well, they're worse than scum. And after Kakashi does this, the entire team would be confused, but would inevitably just agree to being part of Team 7. Following this, with 2 weeks worth of D-rank missions that would be extremely useless, and suddenly after these 2 weeks, Naruto would finally speak up to Hiruzen, asking for a higher ranked mission. Hiruzen would of course oblige, and he would actually tell Tazuna to walk into the room, as Tazuna would do so and begin to essentially be slurring his words, since Tazuna is, well, extremely drunk. Once Tazuna enters the room, he goes on to say, "Raja." He begins to essentially begin disrespecting everybody who was in that room and side with him, and Naruto would pretty much not take too kindly to this, but would decide to just leave it alone, seeing as it shouldn't matter to him whether the client is disrespectful or not, that he's gonna get the mission done one way or the MFing other, okay? So basically what ends up happening is pretty much they all accept, and the very next day they end up meeting by the bridge. Or why do I always do that? I say by the bridge instead of by the village gates, which is where they actually meet. And following this, we basically get into about approximately 1 hour worth of traveling, or actually that's being generous. Yeah, no, yeah, 1 hour worth of traveling before suddenly they end up stumbling across a strange puddle in the middle of summer, mind you. So there should be no puddle, seeing as the heat would have most likely evaporated it. Kakashi looks towards the direction of this puddle and questions what's going on. And it's at this sudden moment that he finally gets his answer. Two demon brothers lunge out at him and seemingly kill Kakashi to Team 7. And once everybody else sees this, Naruto and Sasuke are both simply standing there wondering what they're gonna do next. Sasuke immediately jumps into action, and Naruto, seeing this act by Sasuke, would jump into action as well, actually going on to get a slight cut from one of the demon brothers with its poison laced thing, and Naruto would then go on to create two do you guys know how Batman has those little spikes on the sides of his arm? Pretty much imagine that, but like a gigantic spike that pretty much like connect from the top of his fist to the back of his like forearm thing, right? And it's like this gigantic knife thing. If you guys saw the filler, you guys know what I'm talking about. But he creates one of those and he then rushes at the shinobi, as he then goes on to pierce him and immediately send him flying down, knocking him down a peg or two. And after Naruto goes on to do this, he then pretty much looks to Sasuke, who nods back at him as Kakashi arrives and says that they did a pretty great job. Sakura immediately begins freaking out, like she probably most likely would, and it's at this moment that Kakashi would say, "So you guys handled yourselves pretty well out there. I wonder how you guys are going to handle yourselves moving forward," as he then goes on to look towards the direction of Naruto and, gives him a bit of a smile. Naruto looks to Kakashi, thanks him for that, and then goes on to essentially tell him that, they did their best and that, they tried pretty decently well. Kakashi goes on to, pretty much tell them that they have to keep going, and goes on to pretty much interrogate Tazuna about the real nature of today's mission, as Tazuna goes on to break and immediately start confessing everything, telling him that their village pretty much just didn't have enough money to pay for the true ranking of this mission, saying that, if he doesn't make it home to his grandson alive, he's going to be so sad, trying to guilt trip the team. And it unfortunately works, but, they end up going forward since all of them want to complete the C rank mission, and once they end up pretty much continuing going forward, they eventually end up stumbling upon Zabuza Momoichi, who throws a gigantic blade at their direction, which Kakashi tells everybody to dodge, and suddenly goes on to get trapped by the water prison jutsu. Nothing really changes there, but one thing that does change here is something that I'm about to pretty much kind of reveal to you guys, right? So we all know that in the original, after he traps Kakashi, he ends up making clones, right? Sasuke and Naruto would handle these clones, and after this, Kakashi would beg for them all to run, telling them that he failed them as a sensei and that he deserved what's coming to him. But Naruto goes on to say, no, you don't, as he, pretty much goes on to weave one hand sign before him and shoots hundreds of shuriken-like things, saucers, at the direction of Zabuza. Zabuza's eyes would widen as he would wonder how a Geni knew such a jutsu, and he would actually have to be forced to let go of the water prison jutsu that Kakashi's inside of, leading Kakashi to land on the water and eventually reveal his Sharingan to Zabuza, as he then looks to him and tells him that the real battle starts now. He then goes on to shock Zabuza, making Zabuza believe that he can see into the future, as we then see a sight, a familiar one is that, as it's Haku who jumps in the way and pretty much ends up saving Zabuza from a Chidori that was about to be pretty much impaled into him. And suddenly, Kakashi falls to the ground and is pretty much forced to be carried to Tazuna's house, where Naruto finally goes on to meet Inari, Tsunami, and goes on to finally realize the horrible state of this, village. Once Naruto sees all this, he begins to feel kind of bad for them. And once Inari opens his mouth, Sasuke, kind of begins to stop feeling bad for them. Sakura says, "Oh, well, he's just a kid." And Naruto could not care less how old Inari was, seeing as once Naruto was his age, he was dealing with the hatred of the entire village on himself. So not having a father and mother were the least of his problems. So Naruto doesn't exactly like Inari, but he also does understand somewhat that Inari is just a kid, and that Inari might have been a brat regardless of what his upbringing was, just due to the fact that Inari is, a kid. That said, we basically get this scene where Naruto goes on to continue training for the following couple of days until eventually Kakashi would wake up, and essentially we would see Kakashi go on to train Team 7 in tree walking while Naruto goes on to keep trying and perfecting his Crystal Dragon Jutsu. Once all is said and done, we get this incredible view and this amazing scene where we see Naruto finally successfully create a Crystal Dragon Jutsu. Naruto would jump up into the air with excitement, and after he performs this said jutsu, we see Haku, who's picking flowers, run up to Naruto. He goes on to talk to him, asking him if he has anything to protect. Naruto looks to Haku thinking, oh yo, she kinda bad, and Haku goes on to ask if he has anything to protect. Naruto says not really, and Haku says, shame, if you had something to protect, you'd be a lot stronger. Naruto thinks about this, and Naruto, he begins kind of spitting some game at Haku, right? He's like, oh, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you know about all this? He begins kind of like spitting some mean game to Haku, right? And Haku looks back to Naruto, kind of smiles at him, continues talking to him for about a minute or two, before finally picking up his basket and beginning to walk away. Naruto would have a big smile on his face as Haku looks back and says, oh yeah, and also, I'm a boy. Picking up the story right where I had previously left off, Naruto looks to Haku and questions, come again? As Haku looks to Naruto and says, I'm a boy. Naruto, after hearing this come from Haku's mouth once more, immediately tenses up before then looking at the direction of Haku, looking up and down and beginning to essentially visibly begin shaking. As Naruto then begins thinking of all the things that Naruto was thinking about and then looks back to Haku as he asks once more, are you serious? Haku then begins to giggle and Naruto then immediately goes on, like his personality switches up immediately. He then immediately becomes this like really weirded out, like creeped out guy, and he just goes, so why would you fake being a girl? Like, bro, you're prettier than Sakura. And Haku just looks to Naruto and says, I just think it's funny when guys get flustered. Naruto looks to Haku and says, I'll show you funny, as he begins essentially weaving hand signs. He wasn't going to do no deadly jutsu. He was going to do like something to hurt Haku a bit. But before Naruto can even weave these said hand signs, Haku would pretty much in the blink of an eye throw a senbon at the neck of Naruto, causing Naruto to immediately fall down onto the ground and Haku to just walk away as Naruto was caught completely off guard. His guard was let all the way down, seeing as what had just transpired. Naruto was not expecting anything along those lines to have happened whatsoever. But Naruto then in a couple of hours is woken up by Sakura, who would shake him and say, Naruto, what happened? Naruto remembers the events that just took place and immediately looks to Sakura before saying, nothing happened at all. Immediately going back to Tazuna's place and just having some dinner with Tazuna's family. We then are going to have a brief time skip to when they finally end up actually making it to the day where the bridge fight would actually end up occurring. Now obviously during this said time they would also have their period of training alongside Kakashi, which would yes still happen just like it would in the original. They still learn tree walking, and apart from that what pretty much ends up happening after this is nothing too major, seeing as Naruto isn't exactly going to be having too many cool events take place after this, and eventually Naruto goes on to wake up late like he would in the original because of plot convenience due to the fact that we kind of want Inari and Tsunami to survive, right guys? Like, I mean, I know it's not like the biggest deal in the world, but it would help a little bit if Inari and Tsunami actually ended up surviving this little skirmish with the bandits, right? And after Naruto saves them, he essentially rushes towards the bridge where he finally ends up seeing Haku and Sasuke fighting. However, he doesn't know that Haku's the one behind the mask. Naruto immediately upon seeing these gigantic ice mirrors would immediately decide that he's finally going to whip out a jutsu he's been working on. He weaves the hand signs and suddenly he creates a gigantic crystal dragon that pretty much goes on to essentially shatter one of the mirrors entirely, and it would shock Haku, who would actually be caught very much off guard. This would lead Haku to essentially begin having to engage Naruto and Sasuke in a hand-to-hand battle, and without the speed advantage of being able to actually use the mirror, Haku would have to take them serious. So Haku begins using his true strength, and once he does this and kicks his battle up to high gear, Sasuke would be completely unable to keep up, along with Naruto as well. And with that added bonus of, them both not being able to keep up with Haku, what essentially ends up happening is Sasuke's pushed to his absolute limits, and this forces his Sharingan to finally awaken. Naruto, he actually ends up unlocking the QB chakra like state with his eyes, like the little mini cloak, not exactly the tail, but the cloak, right? And once Naruto has this activated, Naruto was then able to essentially, how do I put this? Naruto is then able to essentially rush towards the direction of Haku and keep up with the speed that Haku is displaying. With Naruto actually being able to keep up with Haku, he goes on to pretty much begin decimating him. And since Sasuke, even though now he can track Haku, he still isn't able to actually physically keep up. He still is kind of just the background character to Naruto still, as Naruto goes on to pretty much shatter Haku's mask. And once Haku's face would be revealed, Haku would go on to open his lips before trying to let something out, and Naruto immediately, like pretty much one tail just immediately grows from behind him, and he pretty much shoves his entire fist into the gut and like chest area of Haku before letting Haku even expose what had happened in the forest to anybody except for, himself. Haku would have a smile on his face as he falls onto both knees and then says, "I'm sorry, Zabuza," as, Haku falls onto one knee, and immediately after this, Haku's, vision becomes blurry, as the final thing that he sees is Zabuza actually getting pierced by a Chidori from Kakashi. Zabuza immediately begins thinking that he'll probably be with Haku soon, and into this moment that both of them would actually make a one-way trip to, well, the other world, the other dimension, right? I forgot what the other world is called, the Naruto verse, but I think it's like the plains or something like that. I completely be forgetting this. But anyways, both of them end up making their way there, and suffice to say, Zabuza this time didn't have his eyes awakened by Naruto, so instead, Zabuza's still gonna be a prick in the afterlife. Haku's still gonna continue following after his lead, and yeah, we basically get a situation where Team 7 is actually the one who handles Gato's men, and after this, we end up having this moment where Gato is essentially given to the people of the town for them to choose what his fate's gonna be, because Kakashi just kind of feels as if it's not really fair for Team 7 to decide what this man's punishment is gonna be, considering that they weren't in the shoes of these townspeople who had to actually suffer under the tyranny of Gato for so long. With all this out of the way, Kakashi just throws Gato to the people, and you could probably guess what happens. Just saying, it's not PG-13. That said though, they end up taking a bunch of his gold, giving some to Kakashi and his team for, a little bit of an up payment on the mission, and they end up actually revitalizing their town and helping out all the poor people that were there. And then, finally, Team 7 was free to go back to Konoha, where they would soon be informed of the Chunin exams. Once they enter Konoha's gates, Konohamaru would actually be waiting for Naruto, and once Naruto walks back in, Konohamaru would ask him questions about how his first mission went. Naruto goes on to explain that for his first mission, it was actually quite alright. And Konohamaru begins asking like, "Oh, well, what'd you do? How was it? Like, did you use any cool jutsu? What about that crystal thing you know how to do?" Naruto immediately chuckles and says, "Yes, Konohamaru, I did that." He then goes on to ask who his big forehead friend is. Sakura just goes, "Cha! What'd you say, you little bastard?" You know what I mean? And she immediately begins chasing Konohamaru, leading him to end up running off and bumping into Kankuro, who then ends up getting into a mini skirmish with Naruto. Now, as soon as this happens, and Naruto sees Kankuro pretty much lifting up Konohamaru by his collar, Naruto immediately goes on to essentially craft a crystal sword, right? He crafts it and immediately points it at the direction of Kankuro, who would simply look to Naruto before kind of making fun of him and telling him, "Oh, I'm so scared. Whatever will I do against a sword? Oh right, I'm a puppet user." Naruto looks to Konohamaru and just tells him to calm down. Konohamaru does so, and Naruto will then go on to explain that he better put that boy down unless he has a death wish. And Kankuro would immediately begin getting cocky, saying that he doesn't know what he's talking about, that he'll kill him, before Naruto says, "Alright, kill me and the boy? You're gonna kill, Hiruzen's grandson, the third Hokage's grandson?" Kankuro, after hearing those words come out of Naruto's mouth, would immediately put Kankuro down, and Naruto would finally let out, "Good, I'm glad to see you don't want to start another war over yourself, right?" Kankuro would immediately begin apologizing, and Naruto would look back to his direction before finally letting out, "Alright then, I think we should be going now." Suddenly though, Sasuke arrives, and the cool little emo music begins playing in the background as, my man Sasuke starts smiling, smirking, being all like, "You in the trees." He starts being all cocky and stuff. And, he's obviously able to sense Gaara. So being able to have this ability, he pretty much calls Gaara out. And after this, Gaara essentially looks towards the direction of Sasuke before saying, "Interesting." Naruto looks up at the tree, and suddenly we have this mini encounter that essentially would have still happened in the original. Fast forward about 2 weeks, and suddenly we find ourselves in the midst of a battle between Rock Lee, the boy with the bushy eyebrows, no taijutsu, no ninjutsu skills or genjutsu skills, but all the hands in the world. So, obviously Lee goes on to fold Sasuke like a book, not like a book, but he pretty much folds Sasuke like a lawn chair, and Sasuke gets sent, flying. And it's at this moment that Sasuke's life begins to essentially, how do I put this? Begin to be put into perspective, because Sasuke starts questioning every single decision he's made up to this point, wondering why some absolute loser was able to beat him in terms of hand-to-hand combat and anything else really. But Rock Lee just simply tells Sasuke that the reason that he was able to defeat him is because Rock Lee has simply been training in taijutsu harder than he has. He's worked harder than him, so even though he has more talent, Rock Lee has more effort. And, we all knew this, but Sasuke didn't. So let's just say that in this version, Rock Lee actually tells that to Sasuke, prompting Sasuke to actually want to train harder, to go harder in the gym, to put more hours in his jutsu, his genjutsu, his ninjutsu, right? And yeah, eventually they find themselves in the examination room, and it's at this moment that Naruto goes on to essentially not actually give a speech this time, prompting all the other team's members to actually get exhilarated and get motivated for the test that's about to come before them, leading to more people actually failing that portion of the exam, and eventually all the Genin pretty much being let loose into the forest of death, only for Naruto to inevitably be forced, well, not be forced, but need to go take a leak and suddenly departing from his team. As soon as Naruto is almost halfway done, Naruto starts shaking it, right? He immediately senses something from a distance. When Naruto starts kind of putting it back in his pants midway, a gigantic snake would come at him and lunge and try to actually chew Naruto, right? It tries to chomp down on him whole, but Naruto would be in the air. And as he's in the air, Naruto would immediately create Excalibur out of crystal. As he comes back down onto the earth, spins, and then chops the head of the snake clean off, only for Naruto to then look at the snake and question how such a large snake could potentially even be in the Forest of Death. Obviously, the Forest of Death is no stranger to strange creatures such as this, but this thing is massive. It's not normal, and this is not something that Naruto was expecting in the Forest of Death when he signed up for this. It's ludicrous. It's bizarre, right? And right, that's pretty much what Naruto's thinking. But as this train of thought pretty much comes through, Naruto essentially goes on to pretty much realize, wait, my team, this definitely has to be a summoning. He immediately rushes towards the direction of Sasuke and Sakura, and Orochimaru at this current moment was about to go give Sasuke a hickey, if it wasn't for the fact that Naruto jumped in, slammed his hands onto the ground, and immediately yelled out, "Crystal Wall Jutsu!" as a gigantic wall of crystal appeared before himself and Sasuke. And Orochimaru jumped back to wonder of not to wonder, but kind of ponder how interesting Naruto's strange ability is. He would jump back as he would question him. "So boy, what Kekkei Genkai is that?" Naruto looks towards the direction of Orochimaru before telling him what he'd like to know, and that it's none of his business. Naruto goes on to essentially look at Sasuke and tell him to get his head in the game, and Sasuke stabs himself in the leg and pretty much looks towards the direction of Orochimaru as he would go on to weave hand signs and shoot a large amount of snakes at their direction. Right? As this happens, Sasuke pushes Naruto out of the way and goes, "Futon style, fireball jutsu!" As, you know what I mean, he then shoots a gigantic fireball at the direction of the snakes, pretty much pulverizing them, and then leaving just chars in the wake of all the snakes that would have lunged at them. Suddenly, Orochimaru's neck would stretch out as he would catch Naruto off guard, and he ends up biting Naruto on the neck. Naruto falls to the ground like a bag of potatoes, and immediately upon this, his heart would begin to slowly stop beating, right? Naruto begins to kind of get to that near death state, but it's at this moment that Kurama's chakra would seep through and Naruto's eyes would grow slit-like, his features more animalistic, as Naruto would look towards the direction of Orochimaru and the curse mark would begin fading, seeing as Naruto was healing and the Nine-Tailed Chakra was getting rid of this curse mark, this fake energy, right? Naruto then looked towards the direction of Orochimaru as he lunged at him and immediately began to pretty much create two kind of like knife things at each side of his arm, like two spikes at each side of his arm, right? Before rushing towards the direction of Orochimaru and engaging in hand-to-hand close combat. Even as strong as Naruto was now, he was still completely unable to even harm Orochimaru, seeing as the canon Orochimaru is already known to pretty much throw hands with four-tailed Naruto in Shippuden. So this Naruto, even though he has crystal release, isn't exactly on Orochimaru's level yet. One thing though would be that Orochimaru is quite impressed with Naruto and wishes he could have made Naruto one of his vessels, but it just doesn't seem to be as something that will be in the possibility soon, seeing as he's the Nine-Tailed Jinchuriki. Orochimaru would simply think, shame, as he lunges towards the direction of Naruto and ends up pretty much hitting him with the 5-pronged seal, putting the Nine-Tails' abilities on hold as Naruto falls unconscious, and he then lunges at Sasuke, giving this man a straight hickey, as they both would end up pretty much waking up hours later, and when Naruto opens his eyes, he would get a sight that he didn't really expect to ever see. Sasuke at this moment was pretty much breaking the arms of one of the Sound Genin, right? And when Naruto saw this, he immediately appeared behind Sasuke as he weaved a couple of hand jutsus and realized that Sasuke was not in the right state of mind. Immediately, Naruto used his crystallization jutsu to essentially transform Sasuke's entire body and cells into crystal and would pretty much trap him, before looking towards the direction of the team that was attacking them and telling them to give him their scroll unless he wants him to free his little friend here. They would do so gladly, and suddenly everybody around them would end up kind of chilling out as they all pretty much end up making their way back towards the direction of the Chunin tower for, the rest of the exams. Naruto looks back to Sasuke after he undoes the crystallization, and Sasuke would tell him that that was definitely not what he had in mind and that he was saving them from those evil ninjas. Naruto looks at Sasuke and says, the only evil ninja I saw when I woke up was you, Sasuke, as Sakura would even go on to state that Sasuke seemed different, more malevolent. Naruto looks towards the direction of Sasuke and tells him to let go of that hatred, it's only going to burden him. But Sasuke just looks to Naruto and tells him that he wouldn't know anything about it, that he doesn't even have a family, so he should just stay out of it. Naruto would go silent for just a moment and then finally let out, yeah, I don't have a family, but I have something pretty damn close to it, Sasuke. You, Sakura, Kakashi, you're my new family. So get with the new program, Sasuke, before we end up losing one of our lives over your dumb ambitions. You need to stop chasing after that stupid goal of yours. Sasuke would immediately look towards the ground as he then grits his teeth and pushes Naruto out of the way, before then, kind of looking back to Sakura and just them walking to the Chunin tower in complete and utter silence. No words would be spoken, but there would be one common thing between all of them. That there is definitely rising tension between all of them, right? And it's to be expected, right? Like, the most civil thing in the planet didn't just go take place, so it kind of makes sense why events would technically unfold the way that they are, right? So anyways though, regardless, now we end up getting to a different section of the video, and this part is going to be sort of a sponsor. No, yeah, it's definitely going to be a sponsor. Right now I need to tell you guys about Some Slight Clothing. Now you guys might be wondering, what Some Slight Clothing's Heather? What are you selling out with again? Now don't worry, this time I'm telling y'all, I love these shorts, right? I'm wearing a pair of, actually no I'm not, I'm wearing a normal black pair of shorts right now, but I usually am wearing a pair of Some Slight Clothing shorts. Now what are Some Slight Clothing shorts? Basically it's a bunch of anime shorts. It's essentially just shorts with dope anime designs for, to start random conversations when you're out and about. You know, random anime fan notices them, immediate conversation starter. You could get a new friend out of them. You could rock them in the house. They're comfortable. You could make dope outfits with them. I got some pictures up on screen right now in case you guys want more proof of how awesome and sick these shorts truly are. And pretty soon I'm probably going to be getting some promotional type video for these shorts to pretty much just put up on the screen. That said, if you guys like any of the designs that are up on screen, then definitely make sure to use the link down below in my description and use code ZETHER for an extra 10% off. Literally, you get 10% off for doing nothing. Come on now, it's a win-win. Your boy gets a little bit of cha-ching, you get some dope anime shirts, and everybody's happy, right? I think that's a pretty sweet deal. Not only that, guys, but seriously, these, like, clicking on these links and buying these things help out the channel more than you guys think. So if you don't exactly want to do anything else, at the very least, you can help your boy out with this. That said though, that's enough of me being a sellout. Let's get back into the video. Right, so they end up making their way back to the Chunin exams, the tower, and once they end up pretty much arriving to said location, they end up opening the scrolls, and bam, suddenly it's revealed that Kakashi Hatake and Naruto sensei Iruka, right? Yeah, Iruka is pretty much revealed to all of them. All of them would immediately ask, so what was the point of the scroll? And they would then finally begin telling them that the point was, well, there was no point. And suddenly they make it towards their way where everybody else would pretty much be gathered before suddenly Hiruzen informs all of them of the fact that they're all pretty much going to be taking part in preliminaries, seeing as a lot of them ended up passing and none of them could have actually predicted the chain of events that would have occurred today. So they're now going to have to take place in preliminary battle. Jumping into part 3, we immediately get into the first battle, which is essentially Naruto versus Kiba. Now, I'm not even going to bother wasting my breath to actually explain how this battle would actually go down because it's just not worth it. Naruto stomps, okay? Naruto folds this man, and it's not even funny how badly Naruto goes on to obliterate Kiba. Now, when I tell you guys that after Naruto goes on to defeat Kiba and Hinata goes over to Naruto and offers him that, you know, that little healing ointment, Naruto looks to Hinata, smirks, and then says, I appreciate it, Hinata, but don't you think you should give that to your little teammate over there? The guy didn't even land a scratch on me, but looks like he might need it more than I will. Immediately, Kurenai looks to Naruto, raises an eyebrow, gets a little irritated by what he just said, and Naruto then goes on to tell Hinata that he's thankful for it and that he'll still accept it either way, telling her that, you know, he should definitely repay her for this favor some other day. Hinata's face immediately goes like dark red, and she immediately just says, okay, as Naruto just walks away, right? We have Naruto walking away. The dude goes off to Kakashi. You know, Kakashi just nods at him. And then we have the following next couple of battles, which essentially go just like they would in canon. We then jump into the 1 month training time skip that happens much like it would in the original, and nothing of the sorts would really end up changing too much this time around. I mean, obviously, we now have Naruto training with Ibisu sensei. He still runs away from him. He still uses the sexy jutsu on him, and he still ultimately ends up falling into the hands of Jiraiya sensei. The training goes much like it would have in the original. Naruto's training with his crystal release is something that Naruto's been doing for years, so he doesn't really need too much practice in terms of that. Instead, the thing that Naruto mainly focuses on is essentially the summoning jutsu and controlling the Nine Tails. That's the main thing that Naruto would focus on. So jumping back into his final battle against Neji, or his battle in the Chunin exams, Naruto's battle against Neji is actually sort of interesting, because here's how I would kind of picture this battle going. Now, we saw Gurren actually fighting against Neji, Kakashi, Naruto, and a bunch of other characters in the filler episode of Naruto, right? We saw Gurren actually being able to take out a lot of characters all at once. So here's what I think would personally happen. Naruto goes into the battle and immediately tries to test the water. So now, if I was Neji and I was in his position, the first thing that I would try to do is basically shoot a bunch of shuriken at the direction of Neji, right? Just to see what kind of defense Neji has. Neji would immediately go on to use the jutsu that pretty much makes everything, like he uses a spinning dope jutsu. I completely forgot what it was, but the palm rotation, right? the palm rotation jutsu, and after Naruto sees that, he immediately realizes that he's able to dodge attacks on that level. Immediately after this, Naruto would decide, alright then, we'll dodge this, as he immediately goes on to create 2 crystal dragon jutsus that would actually shoot at the direction of Neji. Now once Neji tries to use the palm rotation jutsu, Naruto's dragons would actually kind of get nullified, kind of. Not really, because Neji was the one that kind of like got hit back, so it's kind of like he kind of blocked it but kind of didn't, because a lot of the force of the impact still hit Neji, but he kind of goes on to act as if nothing happened, telling Naruto that, you know, nothing's going on and that, you know, he's fine. Naruto looks at Neji and immediately says, alright then, well, if you're fine to continue, how's another 2? He weaves the hand signs once more, and the dragon comes at his direction. Neji at this point is forced to use the palm rotation once again, and seeing as he was already kind of damaged from having to block it once, the second time doesn't go that good for him. You know, he blocks a little bit, and then we get this scene where, how do I put this? Neji kind of gets shot back exponentially. And after Neji, you know, holds his hands out first, he has like a slight grin on his face. But then we see Naruto just saying, yeah, I figured so much, as he would create an eye scythe and immediately rush in towards the direction of Neji. Now Neji would immediately begin using his hands to pretty much weave and dodge out of the way of the scythe, but this is this moment that Naruto would create a sword in the other hand, and he would essentially begin using a scythe and a sword to try to just stab at Neji. Now Neji's only way of getting out of this is essentially to run away, to essentially gain distance and try to throw, well, as many air palms as he can probably muster at this current moment. He tries to go on about it that way, but it doesn't exactly work the best, just because, I mean, what did you guys really think was going to happen? It was obvious that Neji's little barrage wasn't exactly going to be doing much in terms of anything at all. So, yeah. Anyways, though, Naruto eventually, after a bit more of going back and forth with Neji, would eventually overwhelm him to the point where Neji just kind of has to accept defeat, and Naruto was finally going on to become the winner of the match. We then have Naruto just watch on as Sasuke goes on to arrive late, and suddenly, you know, he ends up fighting against Gaara. The fight pretty much goes down just like it would in the original, so no need to just waste my breath there. And then we finally get into the attack on Konoha. Now, Naruto isn't going to be changing anything in terms of what happens in the actual village itself, just because he's not going to stay and not save Sasuke. So pretty much the only real thing that changes here is that the battle against Gaara is just a lot easier than it would have been in canon. And when Gaara goes on to transform into his like almost fully transformed state of Gaara, of Shukaku, Naruto's able to actually jump in the way, surprise attack Gaara, and use his crystal jutsu that pretty much turns his opponents into a crystal themselves. So Gaara is crystallized and is just like looking like what was basically about to kill Sasuke, but he crystallized him before he could, and Sasuke was pretty much about 2 inches away from death. Now he looks towards the direction of Naruto and asks him if he could have been any later. Naruto looks at Sasuke and says, you know, I could have let him finish you off. And Sasuke then says, whatever, dope. So how are we gonna undo this? Like, what are we gonna do once you undo the crystallization? Naruto looks to Sasuke and then says, you got a point, Sasuke. What am I gonna do? But then Naruto just says, well, I guess I could just leave him like that, right? I mean, there's nothing that they could do. If they try to break him out, they break Gaara himself and he dies. So we leave him like that. We take him to questioning and maybe that can help out. Sasuke agrees, he nods his head, and suddenly both of them end up kind of coming to a consensus that, you know what, why not just let Gaara do what he does, right? So yeah, that happens, and what essentially ends up happening after this little situation is Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura, since she was there as well, end up pretty much reporting this to, you know, would report to Hiruzen, but since Hiruzen's dead, they report it to Kakashi, who reports it to Jiraiya, where now Naruto's finally able to uncrystallize Gaara, and with Kakashi and Jiraiya being there, there was absolutely nothing that, well, Gaara was gonna do. Gaara is essentially wiped off the face of the earth, and so is the Jinchuriki for the next couple 10 years, which is going to be putting a huge halt on the Akatsuki's plans. Now, why did the Leaf Village actually go through with this and like take out Gaara? Well, it's simple. They tried to pretty much wipe out their village, so what's so wrong with wiping out their Jinchuriki? So the balance of power pretty much ends up shifting towards the direction of the Leaf Village, but they don't go forth and end up finishing off the Sand Village. Instead, what I picture ends up happening is with the Sand Village being weakened as much as they are, they eventually are forced to end up joining forces with another village that's nearby them that would be willing to take them in and have, you know, extra power on their military assets, you know what I mean? They end up learning some secret jutsus from the sand, and they end up pretty much kind of disappearing in 1 year's time. What that means for the Akatsuki is that the attack on Gaara and the Kazekage, that's never gonna happen because Gaara just gets KO'd early on, right? But one other thing that happens after this is basically Jiraiya and Naruto's mission to essentially go retrieve Tsunade and return her to the village so she can become the next Kage. Now, I really don't see a lot changing here, just due to the fact that obviously we have the beginning of the mission, which essentially just consists of Naruto training. I can't really imagine a world where I make any changes just because Naruto has crystal release here. So the only part that's really going to be changing substantially, even a little bit, is going to be the portion when Kisame and Itachi actually pull up on Naruto. When the ops pull up, you know what I mean? They end up pulling up on Naruto and telling him that he's coming with them. Naruto immediately looks towards their direction and says, yeah, you know, you're kind of funny, buddy, but I'm not going nowhere. Immediately, Naruto creates a wall of crystal in front of himself and the door, and immediately goes on to break the outside of the wall and lunge out to the top of the roof, beginning to run towards the direction of where he believes Jiraiya would currently be located at. It's at this moment that we basically have Itachi and Kisame both essentially arrive to the location where, how do I put this? They arrived to the location where essentially, why am I overcomplicating this? I'm sorry, guys. I was looking at my phone while I was making this part, and I just was talking out of my butt. But seriously, I'm gonna keep it a buck like this, right? Now, we obviously have Naruto going onto the roof, right? He's trying to get away. He's trying to find Jiraiya. Naruto essentially turns back just to see if they're there. And once he turns back forward, he sees Itachi in front of him. He turns back around, tries to run away. He sees Kisame standing behind him. At this moment, Naruto really has one of two choices: to surrender or to fight. So immediately Naruto decides Twin Dragon Crystal Jutsu as two Twin Dragons rush to the direction of Kisame and Itachi, forcing them both to dodge, right? Naruto after this jumps off of that roof and begins to essentially parkour all over the place, essentially leading to Naruto then saying, fine, if I can't outrun them, then I'll just distract them, as he creates about 100 multi-shadow clones and a couple crystal clones to leave them both distracted, but they're all pretty much taken care of instantly, with Itachi using a genjutsu on the clones to make them dispel and essentially make it so that Naruto doesn't have much more time to run away for. Eventually though, after Naruto runs for just a bit longer, Jiraiya would arrive on the rooftop and go on to use his Toad Mouth Jutsu, right? After he uses this said jutsu, what ends up happening following this is basically Sasuke arrives a bit late, and when he sees, you know, Itachi and Kisame, he essentially gets a glimpse of them before finally the Toad Mouth Jutsu would seal itself and Itachi uses a Amaterasu to make his way out of there, right? And then we end up having Itachi look to the direction of Sasuke as he doesn't even say a word, and he just kind of smiles under his mask knowing that his little brother's safe. Jiraiya then checks up on Naruto, and Sasuke says that he wants to go with them for the remainder of the mission. So he ends up going off with Naruto and Jiraiya, and he goes off to actually meet Tsunade just like he would have in the original. Except a little change that's actually going to happen to the series, and by little I mean a big change because this isn't little at all, is actually going to be the fact that Sasuke this time, since he's there, he's going to be watching Naruto learn the Rasengan in real time. So once he finally masters it and he's actually able to defeat Tsunade in the bet that she made with him, and Naruto gets the necklace and Naruto learns the Rasengan, Sasuke actually is kind of jealous of his friend because now he also has a special Keiki Genkai just like Sasuke does. He has the Nine Tails, and now he even has the Rasengan that can actually compete, if not is stronger than the Chidori. Now, keep this in mind, Jiraiya would have also asked Sasuke if he wants to learn the Rasengan as well, but Sasuke denies this, saying that he has the Chidori, that it looks cooler. Naruto says that it definitely is cooler, but Jiraiya explains that the Rasengan is actually much stronger than the Chidori. As Sasuke says, that's so. He says, mind testing it, Naruto? But Jiraiya explains that if they were to fight, even if the Rasengan wasn't stronger, Sasuke could potentially blow off Naruto's hand and leave him, well, without an arm. Or Naruto could do it to Sasuke, saying that it's not a smart idea to do a Rasengan Chidori clash against each other. Sasuke looks to the direction of Jiraiya and says, yeah, not smart for Naruto, that is. As he then, kind of walks away, and it's at this moment that, Sasuke's jealousy kind of begins slowly taking over bit by bit, and eventually the day when they end up encountering Orochimaru and Kabuto, what ends up pretty much happening is Sasuke and Naruto both fight against Kabuto, right? They're able to easily defeat him, seeing as now Naruto also has Sasuke, plus he's a lot more capable than he is in the original, so he's able to quickly actually dismantle Kabuto and able to essentially make it so that Jiraiya and Tsunade are finally able to fight side by side to face off against Orochimaru. Once this happens, Orochimaru realizes that he needs to retreat now, and he looks towards the direction of Sasuke before asking him if he wants to join him, telling him that he can grant him immense power, and to look at the direction of the curse mark and think of how much power he felt when he activated it, telling him that he could double that power for him overnight if he so chooses. Sasuke, hearing the potential of essentially doubling his power, immediately looks to Naruto, and pretty much just like as Naruto looks to Orochimaru, he says, Sasuke would never, but he falls to the ground as Sasuke knocks Naruto out and pretty much body flickers towards Orochimaru's snake. Immediately, Orochimaru is able to use the reverse summoning jutsu to get out of there along with Kabuto and essentially make it back to one of his hideouts, where now we pretty much lose Sasuke, not to the Sasuke retrieval arc, but to Orochimaru himself. And now Sasuke's in the wrong hands way earlier than he would have been in the original events of the canon Naruto storyline. So things very much begin to change rapidly. It's at this point that I'm kind of going to begin kind of speed running the story, because here is where all of the major changes that I have kind of set up are finally going to come into play, and they're not really going to be too much Naruto like changing in terms of like anything that could happen. Since this is more or less after the time skip, Naruto pretty much just perfects his crystal release jutsu and makes more insane jutsus with it. He ends up actually going off with Jiraiya just like he would in the original. Tsunade trains with Sakura. There is no Gaara retrieval mission because the sand doesn't exist anymore. Instead, they actually ended up becoming part of the village hidden in the rain, right? The rain, right? Why not? Or the mist. Yeah, the mist, the village hidden in the mist, right? They joined them, and what basically ends up happening after this is Jiraiya, seeing as they can't actually catch the one-tailed Jinchuriki, doesn't actually go off in search of the leader of the Akatsuki, instead opting to actually remain in the village and finally tell Naruto about Sage Mode, taking Naruto to Mount Myoboku, where he trains him in that and is actually there for Naruto to learn the Rasengan. So when the Akatsuki members essentially end up fighting against, I'm so sorry about that notification going off, guys, let me turn it off. I forgot to turn off notifications. Okay, so basically what ends up happening is essentially Naruto, Jiraiya, and Kakashi, right? Naruto, Jiraiya, and Kakashi are basically in the village, and once they find out about Asuma's death, they go off to avenge him, you know what I mean? They finna get it back in blood. They end up killing Kuzan and Hidan, and essentially, did I really just say Kuzan? Kakazu, right? Kakazu and Hidan. And after that, we basically don't have an assault on the village from Pain. Because keep in mind, without the one tails, you kind of can't do your plan, like at all. You need every single one of the tailed beasts, and they don't have anything to kind of give them remnants of it like they would with all the other tailed beasts, so that they could potentially make a weaker version. So basically they're kind of screwed. The Akatsuki has to wait a bit more years, and that kind of means that the Sasuke versus Itachi fight pretty much does end up happening just like it would in the original, except when Sasuke joins, he's actually not sent to go after Killer Bee, And the main conflict that happens this time around, instead of the Akatsuki being the aggressors, it's actually the other villages that are thinking that the Hidden Leaf Village is actually getting a lot stronger than they should be, right? Saying that they attacked them for no reason, they took their Jinchuriki, that was clearly a Hidden Leaf Shinobi. So the Cloud and the Mist Village would both pretty much wage war on Konoha. And essentially, instead of facing against one man, which is obviously, Pain, they end up having a fight against the Cloud Village, Raikage, and Killer Bee's still hiding, so Killer Bee's not there. So just the Raikage, the Mizukage, I think it is, the girl with, Mei. They also end up fighting against Kankuro and Tamari, and Shikamaru is pretty much forced to actually have to kill his future would-be wife. So that's kind of tragic. But overall, the overarching message in this final battle that kind of ends up going down at the end is pretty much that the Hidden Leaf Village ends up winning, and they end up actually taking out the Hidden Cloud Village and the village hidden in the mist. The village hidden in the stones did not want any part of that smoke, so they ended up actually kind of just making a peace treaty with the Leaf Village. And then the Akatsuki had to wait a couple more years, which is actually 10 more, to finally be able to enact their plans. They ended up recruiting new members since the last ones that they kind of had got killed, and basically all that really ends up happening in the end is we have Naruto, who is now given extra years of training, and Sasuke, who is now given extra years of training alongside the Akatsuki. Now obviously Sasuke's goal was to destroy the Leaf Village and kill Danzo ultimately. He still goes on to do that, but seeing as all this happens with more time for the Leaf Village to actually prepare for the Akatsuki, Naruto's able to actually equip KCM2 earlier than he, well, not earlier, but with more time and preparation than in the original. Kakashi's able to actually master his MS Sharingan ability, and Jiraiya is actually able to perfect Sage Mode, making it so that all of the Leaf Village pretty much gets stronger. And since those other two villages pretty much got wiped off the face of the earth so long ago, there's really not a big conflict, because keep in mind, obviously the Akatsuki members would have gotten stronger as well, but it doesn't compare to the growth that the MC is gonna make. So when it comes to the final battle, it kind of just becomes this kind of, how do I put it, futile effort. Have you guys ever seen it when like the main character's training with the old wise sensei, and he's trying to hit him, he's like, this time I'll get you, but the sensei was really just holding back, and he still needed years and years to catch up. That's kind of what ends up happening to, well, the Akatsuki. Once they end up rushing towards Konoha and trying to attack them, Naruto, with his insane abilities of crystal release, would have ended up developing so many more jutsus with it, and actually mixed his crystal release in with his abilities of the Nine Tails, making it even more OP, making the crystals pretty much unbreakable. So Naruto kind of becomes a god among men without his six-path sage powers, right? And Naruto's now 26. Yeah, it's not going to be funny for the Akatsuki. Once they do attack, they don't get killed, so Naruto never does end up getting the Sage of Six Paths amp. However, in the Boruto era, when each Momoshiki goes on to, actually no, not Momoshiki, but Tamari, the guy with the Tenseigan, right? The guy with the Tenseigan comes and attacks. Naruto's then spoken to by the Sage of Six Paths and actually granted both sides, since Sasuke already would have turned to the evil side earlier, and you can't give the sides of the Sage of Six Paths to both of them. So the conflict doesn't end with Naruto and Sasuke, and the reincarnation process continues happening. Zetsu obviously gets killed off, so there's no more risk of Kaguya, and the Naruto story kind of just ends off on this kind of dry note, instead of what many of you guys were probably picturing. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, it's really hard to come up with a really exciting ending every time, but this is more or less what realistically would really happen in the Naruto world, with these small changes that I was implementing along the way. See, if I didn't really care about those small changes and I just kept everything constant, the ending would have been constant and it just would have been the same as usual. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tale of what if Naruto had crystal release. Oh, and also, if you guys want to watch the next what if that I have on the channel, you guys can do so by actually becoming a member and getting early access to what if Naruto made a deal with Bill from Gravity Falls. That said, if you guys enjoyed the movie version of this, or you guys are watching this in the part series, I definitely appreciate a like on this video, and maybe if you enjoyed the entire series in and of itself, you would go back and like all the previous parts, seeing as it helps a ton with YouTube's algorithm. Also consider subscribing. You've watched an hour of my content, so you know it'd be kind of mean not to. That said, I love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Zether, and I am out. Peace.